how does Montana itself show up in Million Acre Bourbon, not just in the ingredients, but in philosophy. Let's just start with the banking system in general. Like, what's wrong with the banking system? When somebody pours the Million Acre Bourbon for the first time, what do you want them to know before they even taste it?
Welcome to Montana Whiskey, Wealth and Freedom.
Well, I've been in love, I've been on the ground, I've gotten back on my feet, just to fall back down on my knees for you and your whiskey under the bridge.
Willie, the man, the myth, and the legend, he is back. Thank you for coming back in and doing another show with us.
Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, it's awesome. Excited to have you here. Kyle Reese, you are an infinite banking practitioner, in case you didn't know.
Thank you.
Out of Helena, and with the company Create Tailwind. And then to my left here, is my left, right? Correct? Yep. Is Karen Goff. You're a certified liability advisor and mortgage professional with CMG Home Loans, and also the lucky one that gets to be married to me.
Nice.
So, just want to do quick intros because that's another thing feedback-wise we've been getting from people. It's like, who's on your show? Because a lot of times people don't know that up front, so now they do. All right, I'm going to try something new. We're going to do an icebreaker question. Mm-hmm. So, is the hot dog a sandwich?
No.
He's quick on that.
No.
Not a sandwich.
No.
No?
No.
Karen? I can't remember what your answer was.
I mean, I said, well, if we break down the definition of a sandwich, it's meat between two pieces of bread. So if you break your roll in half, then kind of. But, I'm always the person who can say all sides of everything, so I could go either way.
The problem with the hot dog is you don't know exactly what kind of meat it is. We think it's pork, but it depends on where it comes from.
Round.
Well, it definitely isn't a sandwich if it's not on something. If it's just a hot dog, it's just a hot dog.
Yeah,
you have to put it between two pieces of bread or on a roll, and then you could call it a sandwich.
And it's different than a brat. Like,
yes.
Brat's more legit.
Well, I mean, if you think historically, okay, let's do this. We'll finish this real quick, but before we do that, let's get in. Let's talk a little. Let's talk a little whiskey.
Gotta drink some.
Yeah, I wanted just to introduce the Million Acre Bourbon. You can see the bottle sitting here in the front. Just real quick review. We have also done what we have left anyway from the previous shows. Well, Willie, first time you were here, we did the Montana Moonshine and the Honey Moonshine. Last month of December, we did the Bighorn Bourbon, and then of course this one. We also did the Stockman's Rye, which we're out of, and the that was way back, and then the Cream Liqueurs, which are also finished. So anyway, we went ahead and pre-poured. Cheers! Thank you for everybody for
Cheers.
Thanks for coming up from Ennis and down from Helena. But it is interesting with the hot dog being a sandwich, not to belabor this too much, but the Earl of Sandwich, of course, is where it came from. And he was the one that created the notion of taking pieces of bread and putting in meat in between it. And that's what dictated the sandwich based off of his name initially. So I don't know. Hot dog technical terms is meat in between two pieces of bread. But
if you put it in between two pieces of bread.
But I agree with you guys. I don't think it's a sandwich.
Yeah, his knee jerk was totally no way.
Yeah.
I actually went, let me think about this.
The more you think about it, the more it makes sense. It could be a sandwich, but then you'd have to classify a burger as a sandwich.
Yes.
And
Right. It gets messy.
Yeah.
But if anybody that is watching the show actually wants to comment on that, always welcome to take other people's opinions on whether or not the hot dog is a sandwich. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to ask you a question about this bourbon, just to kind of kick off the conversation. When somebody pours the Million Acre Bourbon for the first time, what do you want them to know before they even taste it?
Well, I think, like these Glencairn glasses are perfect for
Thank you for mentioning that, by the way.
nosing, kind of swirl it around and, sniff it a little bit. You can kind of pick up the aromas and pick up the different, tasting notes. And, so nose it first and then take a little sip, get that on your palate and your tongue and, let it go down your throat and feel it warm you up a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty good. It's definitely a sipping whiskey.
Yeah.
And it's technically a bourbon. But it's, we bought a little bit higher proof. It's 100 proof.
Yeah, so be careful on that one.
50% alcohol.
What's the mash bill on it?
It's very similar to our Bighorn, corn and a little bit of barley, a little bit of rye, but mostly corn. All bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, and we probably use around 70 to 75% corn. But it's aged longer, and it's aged different than our standard Bighorn.
One thing I noticed.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
Sorry.
I do too, but go ahead.
Oh, please, ladies first.
One thing that I have noticed drinking your whiskeys and starting with the moonshine that I really enjoy, that I found out about myself talking to Glenn, was that apparently I like rye because that gives it that spicy.
A little spicy, yeah.
And he was saying you guys tend to be a little heavier on your rye than a traditional bourbon, like as far as the Bighorn and of course before it's bourbon in the moonshine mash. Mm-hmm. And I feel too has a bit of that spicy note, so a little bit more of that.
Yeah, that's going to be the rye coming out for the most part.
You had mentioned there's a different aging process to this than the Bighorn bourbon. Could you go into a little bit more detail about what?
Yeah, so all bourbon by law has to be aged in a brand new charred American white oak barrel. So all those words matter according to the ATF or the TTB, which is basically the enforcing arm underneath the ATF. So you've got to use a brand new barrel. It can't go into a used barrel that you've aged something else in. It's got to be charred oak on the inside, and it's got to be American white oak. So there's different species of oak out there, but it's got to be white oak. And there's some different oaks out there. There's red oak, and then there's like West Coast oak, and some of the distilleries like in Washington and Oregon are like, hey, we got this species of white oak, but the bourbon gods, so to speak, in Kentucky and in Tennessee and, back east where bourbon was born, they're like, no, we're not going to allow you to use your type of white oak, on the West Coast. So it's kind of interesting with that. But yeah, basically we age it longer and we marry the barrels up, blend them a little bit differently. We use all kinds of barrels as far as sizes. So size matters in in the whiskey world.
Okay.
And the bigger guys, they all traditionally use, the 55-gallon, 53-gallon whiskey barrels. We use a lot of those too, but we've also used 30-gallon barrels, 15-gallon barrels, 10-gallon barrels. So they all age differently.
Sure.
You got to think like in a 53-gallon barrel, all that liquid in the middle, that clear moonshine, unaged whiskey isn't touching the wood. So whiskey generally has to age longer in a bigger barrel, whereas like a 10, 15, 30-gallon barrel, you don't have to age it quite as long. So there's just a lot of different things, and you're constantly learning. I mean, you never get this dialed down 100%. You're constantly expanding and learning and researching and, okay, how do we, yes, this was freaking awesome. How do we make it just a tad better next time?
Right.
It's from the barrel that it picks up all the coloring, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%.
Because it pulls basically what it's doing is pulling the sugars out of the wood.
Yeah, sugars
And
and
that char.
the tannins and the char. So charcoal is like an absorbent.
Right.
So that kind of absorbs some of the bad, maybe stringent particulates, in a whiskey and makes it more smooth and more palatable.
One thing I will say that I noticed about this bourbon before you got here, when we poured them, we both tried to sip, and just in a very short period of time, from when I poured them till now, it has has definitely mellowed. It's definitely like in a good way. Like it's like it's,
Letting it breathe out of the bottle.
It's definitely
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
calm, like settled. Yeah, it's quite lovely. It's good. What do you think, Kyle?
I really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with it being from a 100 proof, is that determined by how much you proof it down?
Yeah.
Because everything's gonna start high, and then depending on what you want to ultimately bottle, depends on how much you proof it down.
Yeah, it comes off the still just like most whiskeys do, higher proof, not like vodka. Vodka's got some specific laws where it's got to come off, pretty high proof stuff.
Yeah.
Whiskey, and that's every distillery is different, but I'm just kind of generalizing. But you might get some stuff 100 or 80% alcohol, 160 proof or whatever. And then that comes off your still, and you're collecting the hearts, which is the middle part of that run. The heads is the first part of the run that comes off, and you discard that stuff. It's pretty high proof, pretty potent, but it's too stringent. And then the hearts is the middle part of the run, and that's very subjective. Every distillery is going to have what they call the hearts, the middle part. And then the tails is kind of the back end, and sometimes we'll take the tails and redistill that into the next go around. So you take the hearts, and that comes off the still, and it's clear, looks like water, pretty high-proof stuff. And then we add water to it to bring it down to what we're going to barrel it at. Generally speaking, most distilleries barrel their whiskey roughly around 60% alcohol, 120 proof. Some go down to 50, some go down to or go up to 70% alcohol, but we generally barrel our stuff around 60% alcohol. And then as that ages, the angel shares, like if you were to walk in our barrel warehouses, that a lot of that smell you smell is the angel share, that whiskey evaporating out of those barrels. Barrels are made of wood. They're not a vacuum sealed container, so they're constantly breathing, contracting, expanding. So the different temperature levels and ages, and are they on the bottom, or are they in the north side, are they up high? They all age differently, so it's interesting.
It's really it's a little frustrating to have these conversations with you and Glenn, because the answers to questions generates, for every question you answer, it generates 10 other ones, and it's like it's almost impossible to keep track of them all. But from your product line, I'm assuming that this product was designed and made for a very specific clientele. Like when you have how many bourbons that you make available? Roughly 4?
Yeah, I mean, some of our bourbon blends, like our Devil's Brigade is part Canadian, part bourbon.
Right.
Our Bighorn bourbon is obviously bourbon. Our Million Acre is bourbon.
Yeah.
Stockman's is going to be bourbon and rye.
On the rye side.
Yeah.
Your tobacco root rye, which is what we're going to be. That's going to be a hard
rye.
That's a
rye
whiskey, not a bourbon. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as bourbons go, so where I was going with that question is like different clientele. Your bourbon, your Bighorn, which is kind of your staple, one of your staple products. That really is kind of sort of a general market product, where maybe this Million Acre Bourbon might be for somebody that has a little bit different, looking for a little bit different purchase,
different
a little
flavor profile and taste, and something a little different and special and higher end, higher proof. A lot of people like, barrel strength whiskeys, single cask, I can go on, different ways you can make, higher end whiskeys. But yeah, this was our first, higher end whiskey. And I think we started barreling this stuff, day one, right. 2012, 2013. And then I think it was 2017. We didn't, early on, we didn't know we were going to make a, Million Acre Bourbon. Mm-hmm. But we just let stuff age longer. And then the Montana Land Reliance, some friends of ours got a hold of us, and they talked about celebrating their millionth acre in conservation. And so we started wargaming and talking about that, and they wanted kind of a higher end whiskey, and it's like, well, we've got some pretty good stuff in barrels by now. It keeps getting better every year. So we released our Million Acre Bourbon, which was, basically a celebration for their 1 millionth acre in Montana of land conservation.
But you'll do.
And when was that released?
I think it was like summer of 2017, and I think we're on batch. We went a couple years. We've kind of been releasing it, and it used to just be in the tasting room, and now it's throughout the state of Montana, maybe a couple other places. But we're getting to where we're releasing that every year, kind of every winter, like this time of year, December, January, February, and I think we're up to batch 6, batch 7 right now.
Nice.
How much longer does that one age versus something like the Bighorn?
Yeah, it depends. Depends on the size of barrels. Smaller barrels age quicker, and in Ennis, Montana in general, we're at 5,000 feet, a lot higher, drier climate than say the Caribbean for rum or Kentucky for their bourbon. So higher altitude whiskey ages a little bit quicker, and then definitely a drier climate whiskey ages a little bit quicker. So we lose more in our angel share. We lose anywhere from 15 to 20% of alcohol per year. So let's just keep it easy, like a 10-gallon barrel. Okay, you put 10 gallons of whiskey, clear whiskey in there. For one, like a gallon is going to go ahead and soak into the wood. So you've already lost a gallon. So now you're at 9 gallons, within week 1.
Wow.
And then after a year, you've lost 15 to 20% out of that.
Wow.
So you're like at 8 gallons, 7.5, and you can't really age whiskeys super long in smaller barrels. You have to use bigger barrels.
It's neat to me the difference in geography from all that kind of stuff that you have to think about, like the fact that we are so dry, such a dry climate, which makes our winters way nicer. But
I'm totally going to jump tracks here, but just because I have to, because the timing's right. But would you agree, Willie, that with everything that's happened in the bourbon industry or the whiskey industry in 2025, with the with the big distillers, that are either declaring have declared some form of bankruptcy or or having to do just some serious operational strategies to sustain. Do you feel? I feel like, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Do you feel like being a craft distiller now is a great opportunity for you really to shine? Because based on what you just said, you have the agility and the flexibility to do things.
We can adapt quickly.
Yeah, which they can't.
Right.
They're built for scale. They're built for a certain distribution volume. They're kind of hamstrung by their, by their overhead. Where you guys, you're nimble. You're kind of like a special forces team, so to speak. Right. I mean, you have the ability to do a lot more.
Yeah, and we're jack of all trades. We don't just make one thing. We've got quite the lineup now, so we can listen to our customers and look at the market and push and pull in whatever direction we need to as a business.
So it might seem counterintuitive to ask you this, but are you actually kind of excited about where things are right now with the market?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, we keep growing every year, and and that's always good. We grow in different areas, and you got to always look forward and plan ahead to see what's coming down the road, and basically listen to your customers, listening to what people want. I was never going to do a vodka. That wasn't in the game plan day one. Yeah, but people drink vodka, and vodka drinkers, they want their vodka. They don't want a gin. They don't want to hear that your moonshine is your vodka. They want a vodka. So I think we've done pretty good at listening to our customers and what they want. And we got a few other things planned down the road, for this year, 2026, 2027, and doing slow releases of different things that we're excited about, and the guys like to play around with and research, and they're always making weird different things like, hey, try this. Like, man, it's 8:00 in the morning. I just got here. You got to try this. This is pretty good.
I laughed because I always said that I was not a vodka drinker. And then Glenn had to inform me that I mentioned how much I love gin. And he said, well, gin is just vodka with botanicals. And I was like, well, dang.
Yeah. All right.
With the Obsidian, the special release that you did, unfortunately we missed that one. I wanted to do a show on that one, but I didn't have my poop in a group fast enough to be able to do that. Was that a bourbon?
Yeah, that was a bourbon, but it was we aged it differently in barrels, and then towards the end we finished it in our used maple syrup barrels. So we get maple syrup from Vermont, and then we age that in our used bourbon barrels, and then we have our bourbon barreled maple syrup that we sell in our tasting room and online. So we thought it'd be neat to, bourbon was in this barrel, then maple syrup, then we dump the maple syrup, then we add bourbon back into it.
Nice.
Just to give it a little hint and flavor of that, that maple
Do you
that
think
was in there, and that turned out, that was a pretty big hit. People liked it.
Do you think you'll do it again?
Not necessarily Obsidian or the maple. We've got some ideas, and I won't release those right now, but probably this coming fall or winter you'll see another. We're basically calling it like our Bighorn Premium series that we're releasing, once a year, like in the fall or winter, and we'll have another one with a special touch on it.
I love the creativity that goes into all of it. It's great.
It's fun.
One thing I wanted to mention, so these glasses just made me think of it. So these, say the name of them again, Glencairn?
Glencairn, yeah.
Yeah, Glencairn glasses.
We were having a conversation about what are these? How do you say it exactly?
Yeah,
I think it's
so
Scottish.
right. Yeah, for sure. This is something that people can purchase through your they
Online
can
store.
shop online.
Yeah.
Online, yeah. You can get a box of I think 6. Just as one of the many merchandise items that you have available for people, in addition to all of the online liquor sales that you offer. And for us, with the way we're doing things, we're rotating every month a new product that is obviously available online only, because you have some product that people can buy out of the tasting room if they walk in that isn't available online, that we won't be promoting because it's not online. But I just thought this would be a good time to mention, so I don't forget that, especially if I have a little bit more 100 proof bourbon. But what we're doing is every quarter. So this first quarter of 2026, we've got the Million Acre Bourbon. This month of February, will be the Tobacco Root Rye. It's a Tobacco Root Mountain Rye, right?
Yeah.
And then March will be the Devil's Brigade. Really hoping you can come back in for that one.
Yeah. Sure.
But not to put you on the spot, no pressure. But what I'd love for people to do is to go either directly to your website and buy a bottle of each, a bottle of the Million Acre Bourbon, the Tobacco Root Rye, and the Devil's Brigade. And I really want to encourage people, if they do that and they use the promo code TREASURE, then they can get free shipping on those 3 bottles. And that'll give them the ability at home to drink with us while they're watching the show, the recorded content. And I really encourage people to do that and to offer reviews. I want people to send reviews in and share with us, what their thoughts are on your different products. And, that's something I really am interested in seeing grow, is getting more and more, helping you kind of grow more of that direct to consumer sales through the show. And I think that that could be a lot of fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
At the end of the quarter, there will be a drawing.
Yeah.
Of a gift
the end of
bag.
every quarter, we'll do. We'll anybody that leaves a review, we'll put all the reviews into a hat, and then we'll draw a name, and whoever wins the drawing gets a gift. I was going to do a gift package of merchandise, but I think I might do actually just a gift receipt.
Yeah.
And then
that,
let
like
them
a
pick it.
certificate or something.
Yeah. And then that way they can just pick out their own
The merch that they
merchandise
want.
that they want to buy. And that doesn't, then Amy Lou and other great gals that work at the distillery don't have to, be stressed on putting packages together and shipping them for people. So
Yeah.
But also, if they want to buy things like this or the maple syrup or anything from the store,
Yeah.
the promo code Treasure gets a discount.
15% off
those.
merchandise. Yes. She's my in-house salesperson for you.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm interested to try that syrup. That sounds good.
Oh my gosh, it's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
And you know what else
pretty
is really good is their coffee.
Yeah, the
That also is bourbon.
bourbon infused
Yeah.
coffee
Oh my
beans.
gosh,
Yeah.
it's off the hook.
All right, back to the Million Acre. So when you first imagined this bourbon, what problem were you trying to solve, or what gap did you see in the whiskey world that you were trying to?
Yeah, I think it was our first higher end bourbon, so to speak, and and we knew that there's a niche for that market. Not everybody's going to want that or can afford it, or and ultimately you want to sell the second bottle. Anybody can sell the first bottle. The first bottle is based on somebody buys a bottle they haven't had before because the price looks right, or the marketing, or the story, but to get somebody to buy that second bottle, which is always the goal, is everything's lined up with that person. They're like, all right, this whiskey was worth the price and it's good, and I want to tell my friends about it. So that was the goal with this as well. And it was, supporting a cause, Montana Land Alliance. That's the first time we'd partnered with a nonprofit. There's a lot of different nonprofits out there, and obviously me being a veteran, there's a lot of veteran organizations, nonprofits that we work with, and sometimes that gets a little dicey or tricky with alcohol, with veteran, maybe therapy stuff or whatever. And it's like, oh, you're gonna promote it with alcohol, But we thought this was a good fit with the Montana Land Alliance, and they were, we really liked what they were doing in Montana, and I think maybe a few other states, but so that felt like a good partnership, and it still is.
Yeah, well, and I think that your goal of trying to sell beyond the first bottle, I feel like, again, going back to what I already said, that with where things have shifted in the spirits industry, that this is another one of the many ways that really gives you sort of a leg up in the market share, from the standpoint that being a craft distiller, you have the ability to sell great stories, authentic stories. You give people something to connect with, I think, beyond just having to have a sort of a personality-less distribution. Like I feel like a lot of those big boys, they've sort of shot themselves. They fill a void in the market because they're plentiful, mass produced, and so they have a good percentage of the market share. But I think the thing that they don't have that you get to have is people can connect a lot more personally, I think, with what you offer to the market from a product standpoint. And I think that matters to a lot of people. And I think this day and age, we were just talking about this before you got here, that people are so hungry for authenticity, and they're so hungry for connection. And, in a way, we've kind of hit that tipping point where things are sort of reversing. Now people are wanting to connect more with their purchasing decisions, and the living more intentionally with the things that they do, including something as simple as what spirits they buy and who they buy them from. Right. So I think from a branding standpoint, I think you're really well positioned for that. But the last question I have for you, and then we'll move on, is how does Montana itself show up in Million Acre Bourbon, not just in the ingredients, but in philosophy?
Yeah, so with the ingredients, you said not just ingredients, but, it is Montana barley, rye. We do get a lot of our corn from the Midwest. Montana doesn't have maybe the best, or at least in abundance, the best, like a white sweet corn. There's a lot of yellow dent, field corn for cattle and stuff. That stuff's kind of higher in proteins instead of starches and sugars, and we really need the more lower protein corn, kind of sweeter, more starches and sugars. But we get a lot of our grains for Montana and just being proud of where we get to live and work and promoting that, with the Million Acre. And it's kind of funny. I mean, literally like almost day one, friends or, people on social media or email or phone calls, and they still do this to today. And I've never corrected anybody, so my other people might, but they're like, hey, I had some of that $1 million bourbon that y'all had. Where can we get some more of that? It's like, well, sir, here's where you can get some more of that $1 million bourbon. So it's kind of funny.
That's funny.
It is funny, actually, because when I first started putting show prep together for this, I had to consciously make the effort to not call it $1 million bourbon.
I know, it's funny.
As soon as we say million, we expect dollar to be behind that.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Before I change subjects, do either one of you have any questions for Willie that you want to ask him that we didn't cover?
I really like the whiskey.
Thank
the
you.
bourbon, whatever.
I'll have a
It's
comment.
really-
that's-
Bourbon is a whiskey.
Yeah.
A comment from that was interesting for me a number of years ago. My first introduction to what you were doing and Willie's products. A friend had given us a bottle actually of the Devil's Brigade.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, love the story, all that kind of stuff. And then I tasted it, and I'm a person, I don't water my whiskey. I like to just drink things and taste them. And I was like, well, let's see what this is like. And I really enjoyed it. And so then as I explored Willie's products, it's been absolutely lovely to me. Because like you said, you want people to buy the second bottle.
Right.
And it is definitely something that when you try anything the first time, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to get another bottle of that.
Yeah, that's cool.
You good, Kyle?
Yeah.
Of course, you said you were going to, after you tried the Stockman Rye, you were so happy with it, you said you were going to buy yourself a bottle, and you still haven't.
I know. It's terrible. I'd buy this over the Stockman Rye.
Would
It's
you?
delicious, yeah. I like the sweetness. It's just is it okay to say the boldness of flavor?
Oh, yeah.
Is there? Like
oh, yeah.
more
Rich.
than
It's rich.
Yeah, it's rich.
Yeah.
And I like that.
You like rich things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The $1 million bourbon's right just for you.
The money, man. Yeah. All right. So we already touched on this a little bit, but the 2025 Gallup poll found that only 54% of U.S. adults consume alcohol, which is the lowest level recorded since 1996.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we can go in a couple different directions there, but the question I specifically have here is when people are drinking less, how do you earn the pour?
Yeah, you've got to stand out and be a little different than other people, and you got to be nimble. You've got to be able to, once again, create things that people want and looking for. What is the market? What is, and that's pretty big right now. Is what they call RTDs, ready to drink.
Yes.
Americans want simplicity, and they want it quick, and they want it fast, and they want it now, and it's easier for them instead of going home and buying all the ingredients to make a Manhattan or a gin and tonic. You can buy one that's in a can or in a bottle that's already ready to pour, ready to drink. So the RTDs is what we call it in the spirits world, so to speak. And there's a few Montana distilleries doing that, and obviously others throughout the nation, but that's something, we're definitely need to look at and have to look at, because that's becoming a fairly big market. As much as I don't want to necessarily put our good stuff in a can,
Right.
But if we mix it with some of our homemade, cocktails and recipes, and that's something that we're exploring. But
For what it's worth, and I'm obviously just one person, but when I was doing my research, and I did see that RTDs was, the ready to drink options were becoming more and more popular, along with the low to no alcohol content.
The
products.
non-alcoholic spirits.
And I thought to myself, okay, my initial thought was following the trend is a smart business decision, or you can be a trendsetter.
Right.
Right. And my thought was, man, just don't see Willie going down that road, right? And I mean, like, if anything, there are going to be people like us out there that are going to be clamoring for that, again, that authentic distiller, that craft distiller, that it says, you know what, we just don't. Yeah, we just don't go there. We don't play that game.
Well, and the other Montana distillers doing that already. That's because their stuff doesn't stand up to just pouring in the glass. This is ready to drink.
Yeah, there's some
this
awesome
is ready
Montana
to drink.
distilleries making some pretty awesome stuff.
I shouldn't say that though. I feel like a little unfair.
No, but
putting it out there because you've already mentioned that you guys are kicking the idea around. But you stand on your own, and you always have, and I just feel like you always will, and you'll find a way.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this, especially like the non-alcoholic spirits, that was, I wouldn't say it was in our business plan day one, but within 2013, and I've got a whole folder. I'm the good I dig fairy. I'm always thinking of different things, but that's been in the works for 12 to 15 years of making non-alcoholic spirit, because not everybody drinks. You said
Right.
50%, but
Right.
guess what, those people are out wining and dining with their friends who do drink.
Yeah.
And they want, they might feel awkward because they don't have something in their hand, and they don't necessarily want a Coke or a Sprite or a water. And there's some very good non-alcoholic spirits that have been coming around lately. But I can show you a lot of my old notes, but I was going to make like one was we called zero vodka. Like, try to, how can this taste like vodka and, still have maybe the burn or whatever, still be mixable, but there's like zero alcohol or super low. And then another one was a gin. I was going to call it Virgin.
That's great.
But all of my ideas, like all of my names and stuff that I come up with, we run it through our, like, we kind of do our own search, online, and then we run it through our trademark attorney, and they're like, you just gave us 10 names and you can't use any of them.
Wow.
All the trademark, all the names are hard.
Yeah.
And you've got to watch it with that, because you don't want to come out with a product, that, oh, it's doing awesome. And then you get the cease and desist from, a bigger company that's, hey, we're already trademarked Virgin.
Yeah. Well, and having said that, we actually just released the show. We released this, what's today, Wednesday, 2 days ago, was with a guy who actually is the one that we got the hot dog question from, to credit him with that. But he's a non-drinker, and so when we had the conversation with him, we had a great show. It's on the channel now. Not Built for You is the name of the show, but we had no bottles on back there,
Which he wouldn't have had a problem with at all, but-
Yeah, he wouldn't have. But it just because he's not a drinker,
Yeah.
we had a kind of a very different.
It would have been nice to have a non-alcoholic. at
But
your
I'm just, that's what I was just thinking. To your point, there are people out there that that represent part of the market that they
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have something for them. Yep. All right, now I'm going to completely shift gears. So with the spirits industry going through one of the most turbulent periods that it's seen in decades, how much of the current crisis is really about debt and access to capital that you think from being a kind of insider perspective?
I don't think there's a ton of it with debt and capital. Maybe I think it's just like you were saying, some of those guys can't, do anything different, or, they are what they are. Here's what they make, and just spirits goes in cycles. In the 20s and 30s, maybe gin had its heyday, and then rum had its heyday, and then like the James Bond movies kind of brought back vodkas,
Yep.
and vodka had a very big run. It still has a pretty big run right now, but vodka was, the leader, out of all the categories for a lot of years. And then it slowly switched to whiskeys and bourbons, and we're at I don't know if we're probably past the peak now of bourbons and whiskeys. It's getting a little saturated, but you got to think, you got all these people that have, just millions of barrels of bourbon and whiskey, and they've got to sell it.
One for those big guys, how much of the trouble for that was that they so much of their market was overseas, and then with the tariffs that they can't.
Yeah, and we haven't had to deal with that because we're not in Australia and a lot of other countries.
Right, but as far as them losing their market share, like business planning from that standpoint, all of a sudden you go, oh wait a minute, we are overextended on what we're doing and didn't expect this, and so yeah, that's tough.
Well, I can't remember where I read it. I don't know, New York Times or something like that. But there was an article that was out not that long ago about not only the reduction in consumption levels in the industry as a whole, but when you have, I think it was kind of a little bit of a jab or a shot at the whole tariff environment, the tariffs putting a little bit of a squeeze on the global markets, like Karen was saying.
Yeah, for the big guys, for sure.
And also the inputs, your suppliers, like, if you've got barrels coming in from certain places or,
That's a nice thing about bourbon. It's got to be white American oak, right? Yeah. So it's got to be here.
Right. But I don't remember what specifically kind of inputs they were referring to, but there was basically what they were saying was that there was a couple different things going on in the industry that was sort of leading towards this shift in operational strategies from a financial side. One was the increase in costs.
Yeah,
and then just the inability to move as much product because the market's shifting and people are starting to spend less on things that they're just not valuing. And so I was just curious, that.
I wonder how much those big guys import even their grains from, if they can get it cheaper from somewhere else.
Yeah,
that they're
maybe. Yeah,
trying to bring it in.
Yeah, I was trying to think of different places in Europe or China or wherever.
Well, I'm thinking more South America if they're importing their grains from.
Well, even Canada. I think Canada basically is kind of.
That's true. They definitely for sure have a ton of crop as far
and
as
grains. People have always asked me that over the years, like if corn rises to a certain point or wheat or barley. That's never been a huge factor on the price of our bottle. It's a factor, but it's not the biggest one. The biggest one has been getting barrels and glass prices and just shipping in general. Labels have gone up. Glass has definitely gone up after COVID. That was a huge fiasco. Barrel prices just keep going up. We don't have white oak in Montana, so we have to buy barrels from Minnesota, Missouri, Kentucky. And this is an article maybe 7 or 8 years ago, but there was an article saying about like whoever owns the oak tree forests at the end of the day is going to be able to keep making bourbon. And Jack Daniels, and not that Jack Daniels is a bourbon, it's technically a bourbon before they do another finish at the end, and then it's not a bourbon, it's a Tennessee sipping whiskey. Right. But just mention some of the other bourbons in Kentucky. At the end of the day, those people are investing in white oak because the way the laws are written right now, you have to use white oak. So they're buying thousands and thousands of acres and planting white oak trees, and so it's a little bit of a concern, as far as the bourbon world.
In the unique world, as far as just whiskeys, have you thought about doing something that, because it can be a whiskey and in any kind of barrel. So as far as, like you were saying, the different kind of flavor from like whatever kind of trees are easy to find here, easy to source, that could be.
Yeah, and there's not a ton in Montana. I really looked at that. I used to work for the Forest Service as fire crews, hot shot crews, smoke jumper, and you really know your western trees and Montana trees and land, a lot of obviously conifers and stuff like that. There's not that much hardwood. You've got some cottonwoods.
And it's got to be hardwood because the softwood would absorb too much.
We've played around
right?
with like using mountain mahogany, a few other Montana things, but it doesn't really do much. And we played around early on with applewood and red oak and maple, and we still got a lot of those samples. And sometimes I'll give a tour in the back and to somebody, and we'll pop one open this is from 2012, aged in maple wood or whatever. It's got some color there, but you drink it and it's just not something that people associate whiskey with. And
Right.
it kind of turns
Interesting.
out that white oak is the gold standard.
Huh. I mean, sugar maple especially seems like that would be like a perfect one. So
well,
that's
and I just
interesting.
think people have grown to the taste.
Right. That we're
You-
used to it.
You broke into your dad's cash or your grandpa's cash, and your first shot of Jim Beam or H&H and Age, whatever it was.
Yeah.
At, 15 years old, that's what you think whiskey is.
That's what
And then,
yeah.
so you kind of acquire a taste of what you think it is, and you can't really go too far outside the box on that.
But that's why I think there's always going to be a market for that, regardless of what changes in the industry as far as the ready to drink stuff and all of the, the convenience and the things were going to change, but there's always going to be this. Like this is just sort of like this is almost part of, like, even though it's not full on part of our American ethos, or is it?
It kind of is.
Yeah, and people are wanting to be more healthy. I mean, it's just all across the board. I think a lot of, I can't speak for other countries, but Americans in general, I mean, everything's about health, and here we are in dry January. It's not going to happen for me, but people want,
You're not talking about the weather.
They're thinking about calories and something in the can that looks cooler, and it's like, oh, it's it's not a bottle of whiskey, or it's not a big heavy beer. They think it's more. And honestly, I don't know what the percentage is, but some of this is just with like marijuana or THC kind of slowly getting opened up in more and more states. And I would bet that there's more people probably, doing gummies or doing marijuana and dropping alcohol.
It's a generational
choose-
shift, right?
Well, personally, I choose to focus on the fact that the doctor, all the studies that say an alcoholic beverage a day is good for your health.
Yeah.
And there's the littlest calories when I just drink
Oh,
it
yeah.
straight
Yeah.
because I don't have all the sugars
All the
from mixers.
mixers.
It's
Yeah.
good.
No,
So,
100%. Yeah.
I even like to find stories that like it kicks out bacteria. Anything that I'm like, just give me my straight whiskey or give me my straight bourbon and see, it's good for me.
You're saying
Very
you like
healthy.
information that reinforces
I
your
do.
beliefs.
I do.
Okay.
We had an old school doctor. He's still around. He's not practicing anymore, but I won't mention his name, but everybody in Ennis knows who he is. But day one, and he's old school Vietnam Marine recon guy turned doctor. But he would prescribe people like day one at the distillery, 2012, 2013. People would come down with a little script that says, you need a honey moonshine hot toddy. Oh, you got a cold or whatever, and they'd come in. My doctor gave me this script. I was like, here you go. But that's the way I grew up in Western North
me too.
Carolina. Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
it was kind of medicinal stuff.
Yep.
Sometimes.
Rub whiskey on the baby's gums because it doesn't hurt. That teething doesn't hurt anymore.
I don't know. I still want to believe that we Karen's a graduate from West Virginia University, and they just rehired an old coach that has what he calls an hard edge mentality, and he's run off a lot of kids, a lot of players, because they're like, what is this hard edge shit? Like I don't live this way. Like, they want the ready to drink product, right? And
I need my massage after my workout.
but I still want to believe that there are people out there just clamoring for that hard edge.
Oh, they are.
They were like, give me the 100 proof straight,
It's
and
in
that's
our DNA.
So I don't think we'll ever lose that. But you did mention, Willie, that there was some increase in costs with glass and with barrels and grains and things of that nature, and I know that. While again, I'm really wanting to differentiate between the corporate distillers and the craft distillers, because this is where I do feel like that you have a great opportunity, right now in front of you. And so from a cash flow perspective, one of the things that I think that has kind of pinched a little bit the big corporate distillers of the world is that they have become very dependent on their banking relationships and their bankers, and interest rates have, capital's become more expensive. There's tighter lending requirements. Banks are starting, or at least over the last year or two, have started to really restrict, and so that really has become kind of a variable or a factor for them to be able to really compete in the market space. And that's why you're seeing what you're seeing with them making the decisions that they're making. But I did want to bring Kyle in, just a little bit of that shift that I was going for, is that to kind of talk about, so with Kyle being a infinite banking professional, I thought he'd be a good person to ask kind of at a 30,000 foot level. Let's just start with the banking system in general. Like, what's wrong with the banking system? Like, why, what's wrong with the banking system?
Well, I think it's a matter of control, right? There's a very small group of people that control the banking system. And like you said, the cost of capital is determined by, a lot of factors, but not by our best interests, right? Is by the person who has the capital that is in charge of lending it. That's where a lot of that source is from. And so what's wrong with the banking system is that we don't have control over it when they determine that it needs to be higher or lower or easier or harder. Like, it goes with the market. It goes with, so many different variables. And when we as business people are trying to make decisions and get ahead in certain market conditions, the banking function is being controlled by, a select group of people, and it makes it difficult to utilize them to get, what we want.
And please help yourself to more of the Million Acre Bourbon, just so you, that's why I said it.
Was that not a good enough answer?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention that because you guys are getting low over there. But
I personally kind of seen a change in, the whole, the recession, like the 2007, 2008. I think that definitely changed a lot of things in the banking world. And that's just me, not knowing anything and just looking from the outside in, you kind of used to, not that I knew that world that well, but it seemed like you could go to bank and get a loan for this or that, and that kind of just went bye-bye. Like, you better have your ducks in a row, and you better have a crap load of collateral, and you better be putting down a bunch of, which is, reasonable, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they're mitigating risk, right? That's the whole thing with lending, is you want to make sure that your risks are taken care of. And from a banking standpoint, when inherently they're insolvent, you look at the last 20 years of banks, and we've had over 600 bank failures or mergers because they can't keep going, which is kind of a failure. We've had over 600 of those out of the 4,000 plus FDIC banks in America in the last 25 years. That's a huge number. That's a huge percentage. Yeah. And so it is their responsibility to mitigate the risk. The unfortunate thing is that it often comes back on us as business owners in having to assign more collateral, having to jump through more hoops and all of that. When you look at the base of operations that a bank uses is inherently insolvent. I don't know, I just blanked on the word, maybe because I drank too much of this already, but the
arbitrage that they're able to use, just the fact that their lending rules of how they can take whatever they have and loan out significantly more than they actually have as capital is crazy.
Why am I forgetting the term for that?
I know.
Fractional reserve.
Fractional reserve. There we go.
I say that word all the time, and it just was gone.
I don't.
Yeah. I don't blame you. It's not a fun thing to think about. But just looking even what they did during COVID season in 2020 when they took away the fractional reserve. So originally, if they had, they could keep 10% on reserve and lend out basically 10. They could lend out 10 times of what they had in the bank legally. And in 2020, they dropped that to 0%. So we're dealing with a system that is inherently insolvent. And because they know that, they have to take very calculated risks to not upset the apple cart. They're on a fine edge, and for everyone that's managing them, I love the bankers that I know, but they've got to do their due diligence and cross every single box and then some to make sure that they're profitable. That doesn't end up being in our best interest as borrowers.
Well, that's what I always say about being in the lending world. Like, you need to be, the bank wants to loan to you. I love the term that borrowers have to borrow, but investors choose to borrow.
Yeah.
But it's important to choose to borrow at a time when you can, because if all of a sudden you become a borrower and you can't prove that, hey, don't worry about it, no matter what you're sitting on as far as assets or whatever, for the most part, the bank's like, yeah, we aren't loaning to you right now. So keeping that in mind is always important, because the bank is always going to make sure they get theirs back. So figuring out a way to have your assets, understanding the flow of money and how to keep more of it for
they're going to
yourself.
make sure they get theirs back, but they're
And then some.
Right.
Yeah.
They're a business too.
Right.
Yeah, right. But not only that, the collateral that they're asking for, they don't want the collateral.
No.
And if they have to take the collateral, they know it's going to be a loss for them,
Right.
which is why they ask for more collateral
Right.
than what they're going to lend out.
100%.
Right. Which is why it doesn't matter how much you're sitting on. If you are in a point where you can't prove at the moment you can pay it back, they aren't going to loan to you. So you better make sure you get whatever in place at a time when you're capable of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, their collateral is not guaranteed.
Right.
And that's a scary thing from a banking standpoint, is to have unguaranteed collateral. I know some people that will not loan to individuals or anything. They will not loan without a 300% collateral guaranteed. That's huge.
Yeah. I think a lot of the days of, standing by your word and, hey, I'll do this, I promise I'll do this, this will happen. I mean, and that's a lot of that's kind of gone away or degraded. People's word doesn't mean as much, or their character.
I mean, how many times have you been burned by that, right?
Yeah.
Same with me.
But for my world that I came from, it was all based on that. So when I first came out of the military or whatever, I just assumed people would take me for what I said. Like, when I say something, I mean it. But people don't, because they've been burnt.
Well, we grew up on It's a Wonderful Life, right? And the Bailey Savings and Loan was going to say, but no, come on, we get how all this works. But the problem is, for the most part, banking, because it's become so regulated, doesn't even get to do that.
No,
so
yeah.
even your small local bank who would want to do that, they know you. They
get
know you're going to be
degree,
good.
and it takes a 5 to 10 year relationship to get those people to be like, all right, I think when Willie says something, he's going to do it, but they still have their.
Well, that's
because they have to check all that. They're so overrun.
Well, they're owned by somebody out of
Right.
the Midwest or somewhere else.
Well, you touched on a really important point, Willie, is the relationship. And that's where I think a lot of the, some fallacies have happened, not fallacies, but some issues within like borrowers and bankers have happened, is people aren't prioritizing that relationship with their banker in the same way that they could to generate really good value for them in the future. I was talking to a very successful person who has done it with horrible relationships with bankers. He just happens to be very good at what he does. And I was telling him, my strategy is to develop relationships with every banker of every bank that I have, and have an account in each single one, and have those be local, because as soon as something turns corporate and you're dealing with checks and boxes from somebody that doesn't know you from Adam and lives states away, the likelihood of you getting something when other people aren't getting it is very low. But relationships can move mountains.
Willie, I know we've mentioned this a couple times since the start of the show, but are you familiar with the term infinite banking? Or have you heard of the infinite banking concept before?
Not really, no.
So, as I mentioned when I introduced Kyle, he's an infinite banking practitioner or professional, practitioner as well, but professional. Kyle, would you please, explain the infinite banking concept as an alternative to kind of going back to the conversation we're having about corporate distilleries versus craft distilleries, where this is a wonderful time of opportunity for the craft distillers, because in my opinion, because there's a lot of what they have the ability to do from a nimbleness, agility, flexibility, just control standpoint, control is, that word that I know that you like to use a lot, is they seem to be a lot positioned strategically in a way where they can win. And I think the infinite banking concept is something that really is applicable to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So infinite banking in a nutshell really addresses the question, what does money cost? And money costs something always. It doesn't matter if we are borrowing from a third-party banker or if we're paying cash. If we're borrowing someone else's money, we are going to be paying interest back to them. If we're using cash, there's lost opportunity cost because that cash will never make money again. There is no future for that cash. It's whatever you put that into, right? Whatever you traded it for. And the way banks work is you have a depositor that deposits money into a bank, and you have the bank that makes that lends out to borrowers, right? Mm-hmm. So you have depositors on one hand and borrowers on the other side, and then the bank is in the middle. And every single person is depositing money into a bank and borrowing money from a bank. What most people are not is playing owner of that bank. The only problem is the owner is the one that's making all the money because they're making the money. They're making a lot of money with not their money, right? They're using depositors' money to
other people's money.
Yeah, right. And so they're creating cash flow to come back to them, and they're controlling that entire system. And so infinite banking really is just building a wall around that entire scene of depositor, bank, and borrower so that no money leaves it. We are now playing the bank owner that's lending to ourselves or to whatever. I mean, we can lend to ourselves, we can lend to other people, we can lend to anything. That's our prerogative as the bank owner. And that really changes the game because it empowers the individual to make decisions and on a much quicker basis. Like imagine if you had to if you wanted to make an investment, let's just say, I don't even know what kind of volume you do, but the number 100 barrels comes up for a good price, and it takes you 2 weeks to get that money from a bank versus 2 days to get that money from your own banking system. Does that give you an edge on your competition to get those barrels at a better price?
Yeah, for sure.
So the question that obviously a lot of people probably would have is, okay, I get the concept, I hear what you're saying, but the question is, well, how the heck do I do that? Like, because obviously you're talking about a financial arrangement or transaction, so there has to be some kind of legal contract in place that actually makes that relationship work. So for people that don't know what that looks like, to enforce or implement that concept, what is it?
That's the cool thing about infinite banking is it's a mindset. It's not a product, right? So the best in the world, the best in history have always had control over capital. So then the question becomes, well, how do you control capital? And how do you control capital in a way that whether you use it or not, it's not going to lose value, right? So we look at, you can do infinite banking with anything. You look at gold, right? The original precious metal that we're trading with. It's relatively illiquid, which is why fiat currencies have came onto scene, and then going away from the gold standard happened, and then cryptocurrency. Everything has happened to speed up the mode of transfer or the method of exchanging value. That's the answer that everybody's looking for. So while you can do infinite banking with anything because it's a discipline and it's a mindset, the question becomes, how do you contractually control that rather than just control it? Because if I put, $1 million of cash into a cellar so that when that opportunity arises, I can take that cash out and go do something with it, great. But what happens if 2 years from now we've had a recession, we've had a lot of inflation, and that $1 million, it only now has a purchasing power of 500,000. That sucks, right? So putting your money into a system where you have a constant, uninterrupted growth arrangement, right, is that's an important element. But oftentimes when we're doing that, when we're talking to financial advisors and different areas, we're exchanging that that blessing, if you will, for a lack of control. Now we're having to jump back through hoops to get access to it. Whole life insurance is one of those things that provides unilateral control over the asset value itself. Let's just call it the equity or the cash value within that contract. And they can be constructed in a way that gives you such control that there's never a loss within the contract. Now, you can be a bad manager of money and be a bad practitioner as a banker. You can be a bad banker and ruin the whole system. But as far as the contract goes, the value is ever increasing. And so we're not having to worry now about the losses that are experienced in the market and all that other stuff. And when we can have a contractually guaranteed access to that kind of capital, we can then go implement or go enact our will in the marketplace at a very fast pace.
So you mean I can just walk down the street to my State Farm agent and just set up one of these contracts?
Hey, I was just in a meeting with a good friend of mine who is a State Farm agent, and he would be very happy to set you up with a contract like this.
Nice.
But there's a couple different elements, and so there's different carriers out there. There's hundreds of life insurance companies, but we only work with companies that have been around for over 100 years and been showing profitability or providing dividends back to the owners, which would be the policyholders, for over 100 years, right? So that proof of profitability is really important, and that's going back to the policyholder. So that really boils down like the options of who we do business with, and then you look at the friendliness. Like we were talking about, if it takes you 2 weeks to get access to money, that's no good. Not for a business owner in this market right now. When we're looking at speed of exchange of money, 2 weeks is too long. And so there are very, very few carriers out there who are friendly to this type of business. And that's where when people work with us, they get that top of the line service. When someone says, hey, I need $520,000 for this down payment on this real estate deal tomorrow, the answer is, yeah, it'll be there in your bank account. We call them, we get that VIP service because of the quality that we do, and that money is wired to them. They don't ask why. It's a collateralized asset. You're not having to go to the bank and having to prove financials and do all this stuff. There is zero question. It's send me my money and send it now, and the answer is yes, sir.
So to tie this together in a neat little bow, Willie, the interesting thing and the reason why I was kind of excited to have you and Kyle on a show together is because one of the things, ever since I launched Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom, one of the questions I've had in the back of my mind is, how do I connect the concepts of whiskey and wealth together in a way that logically makes sense for an audience, right? Like, right. No, because it's not obvious. But so it's really been something I've really been exploring, and I feel like I'm getting closer. I don't know that I'm 100% fully there yet, but I'm starting to see or recognize that there is a commonality, a common denominator between the craft distillery industry and what Kyle does on the infinite banking side and access to capital. Is it really all boils down to really having maximum control and maximum flexibility. And I'm like, people, I think, again, we're entering a great, very exciting time period, I think, in this country where I think people are really wanting to reclaim their agency. They really want to be able to just do what they want to do, when they want to do it, with who they want to do it.
That's freedom.
Right?
Yeah,
that's freedom. That's
the freedom part.
That's the freedom part. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I'm like, wow, that's the connection. The connection is that there is a strategic advantage to being a craft distiller, and for the reasons that we've discussed and more. And there are ways that people can manage their wealth position in a way that puts them in the same level of control and and access to capital and just kind of being the one that dictates the terms. And I think that's really exciting. I think that's a message that really resonates, I think, with a lot of people. And I think a lot more people are wanting to hear more of that kind of opportunity.
To your point, we can play games all day long that other people write the rules for. And we can win sometimes and we can lose sometimes. But our chance of winning the game that we write the rules for is a lot higher. A lot higher.
For sure. Yeah.
There was a period on the end of that.
No, it is.
Yeah.
I think there was a period.
Like more
There's
favorable.
an exclamation
Yeah,
point.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
More
If
favorable.
we're having to learn someone else's game, learn all the rules,
Right.
it takes us time to figure out how to win that game.
Right.
If we create the game and we play by our
Yeah.
rules, we have the control.
Right.
And guess what? The likelihood of us winning goes up. It's not a guarantee. There's no
That's-
silver bullet.
That's how my wife wins all her games against me. Like she writes the rules, and I'm like, what? I got to win by 2 points, not 1 point. You know?
That's hilarious.
Like, come on.
So last question, what do people need to do well in order to succeed with infinite banking?
You know, you got to be disciplined. Becoming your own banker, Nelson lays out 5 human principles or human issues that need to be addressed. And one of them is, living below your means. That's an important thing. It's why oftentimes we work with business owners is because they understand some of these human principles. It's like you don't get out. I mean, you don't get everything that you want all the time. Like you have to be disciplined and be willing to do the work and go through and process things correctly in order to win. It's not just a gimme, right? So I would say that's kind of the biggest thing, living below your means and being disciplined with your finances, but then being willing to rethink your thinking. We have, like you were mentioning, you were raised in a culture where your word is your bond. And that's how I was raised. Fortunately, I think I'm younger than you. I could be wrong.
A little bit, yeah, maybe.
But I was fortunate to be raised in a culture where your word was your bond. And then coming out into the business world more, I've realized that that's just not the case. And I can't maintain that same level of thinking and be productive in that space because not everybody plays that way, right? So we've got to be willing to rethink our thinking all the time. If we don't, we go stagnant. It's better if we're playing by somebody else's rules and in their system. That's just better for us. But if we want to be to break out of the herd, if we want to go write our own rules and be willing to make a splash, to really make an impact on people around us, we have to rethink our thinking. It's important.
To be a pioneer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would say along with that too, I mean, honestly, first think. Because unfortunately for, so much of America, there is no thinking. There is just doing.
Yeah.
There is just doing what everybody told me to do. And as
Yeah.
long as I'm doing that, I'm going to trust I'm fine. And so you have to think first before you can even rethink your thinking. Because if you don't even know how you're thinking, there is no rethinking it.
Yeah.
Think first and then actually explore that.
That is the if I can accomplish anything for you aside from increased product sales, is to really help drive home that point of connecting what you have to offer to the marketplace for the people who really want to intentionally embrace that agency that they want to be participants in their lives and not passengers.
Right.
And I think that from an identity standpoint, from a branding standpoint, huge opportunity for you, because I think that while this show really is much more than talking about money, and it's really actually much more than talking about whiskey, I think there is there's a bigger story there that I think that people are going to be connected to.
No,
And-
100%.
yeah. And so if I may, thank you, Kyle, by
Yeah,
the way.
yeah.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that information. Couple of closing questions for you, Willie. If this bourbon could tell you one story about your journey, what would it say?
I just think off the top of my head, just back to the basics and not necessarily the roots, but this, specifically the Million Acre Bourbon, but just keeping Montana, open. wide open spaces. You know, one of the Montana Land Alliance's slogans is cows, not condos. And, you know, we all get it, you know, affordable housing. And, but it's just protecting and preserving, you know, what Montana was and, you know, what it is, and, you know, continuing with that. You know, I think there's something out there, and I was just looking at it, I don't know, recently within the last 6 months, but yeah, it's something like 50% now, maybe 51% of people who live in Montana were not born in Montana.
Wow.
You know, it's a pretty big number. I think it just went over the 50% mark. But there's a reason why people move here, and I think it's for freedom and, you know, what we have to offer, you know, our landscape and hunting and fishing and openness, and, you know, back to the freedom word, you know, freedom word. And so I think that's what, you know, this bourbon represents to me.
Well, that goes back to the whole kind of, even back when Montana was a territory, before it became a state in 1889. You know, what drew people out here were, you know, the people that were seeking opportunity, and the freedom to do what they wanted, to be able to stake their claim and their potential fortune. And, you know, that does still exist in the state. And actually, one of the things that I have on our website, Treasure State Advisors, is you don't have to live in the West, but that doesn't mean that you can't live with more of the West in you.
Right.
And that's those people that read that on the website and identify with that. They're like, yeah, I don't live in Montana. I don't live in the West, but I want to live in a way where I have more of the West in me.
Right.
I want them to go online and buy Willie's Distillery products, because I want them to see that every time they grab that Freedom bottle, right? That's
right.
the name of that bottle, the shape of that bottle. Isn't that a Freedom bottle?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Every time they grab that Freedom bottle, I want them to think, you know, gosh, I wish I was in Montana, being able to stare at, you know, that mountain range every day. And I can't, you know, but at least I can pour myself a glass of Willie's Distillery bourbon, and, you know, and that makes me feel a little bit more connected to that mindset. And
get a taste of Montana.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
it's interesting for me too, from a mindset like in Montana and where we've come and all this, because being in the real estate world on the mortgage side, but, you know, seeing that progression. I mean, first of all, we aren't from Montana, but, you know, you never get to choose where you're born or who you're born to. Well, I got the lottery on who I was born to, but man, I should have been born to Montana, but they just wouldn't live here. So I got here, you know, as fast as I could. So, but when we came here, he had been here for ages, but when I came here, it was very much it was a choosing it. It was I want to believe it. I want to be part of this. And it's always interesting being in my world. You know, when I'm sitting there looking at people and I'm like, you aren't going to make it past the first winter, or you have what it takes to be a Montanan. And it's always interesting to see, because you're either, that's the thing I love about this state.
Yeah.
You're in your heart a Montanan and going to make it, but you might have moved here for the wrong reasons. Oh, look at how pretty it is in the summer.
Yeah.
And you aren't going to last long. And that's okay too. But, you know, I always find that interesting but
you got to choose. That's a choice, you know. And I was told that like back in the 90s, you know, moving out here, you know, had to do something with, it's kind of the Montana tax. Like any of us could live in other states. You know, I could be in New York or California or Texas or Florida or whatever and be making way more money.
Right.
But I'm willing to pay that Montana tax for this lifestyle all day long.
I recall a story that you told the first show that you were on when you were promoting the moonshine in Red Lodge, about how you came out of the Snow Creek Saloon, and it was in the middle of winter, and everybody was hooky bobbing down Main Street, and you were like, I want to do that. That's it. Those little moments, you're like, I belong here, because you could have walked out and went, oh shit, it's cold. Like, what am I doing here?
No, we get a hooky bob and grab onto the tailgate and head to the next bar. Pretty damn cool.
That's when you know that you're meant to be here.
Everyone this year, though, who
They ain't
might have
hooky
moved
bottom.
here in
my gosh, it's
summer
all-
or fall,
yeah.
they're like, "Oh, in winter's easy."
It's easy here. I know this is crazy.
They're in for a surprise.
It's like mosquitoes.
For all of you,
know,
I looked in my journal and
you have to have the hard frost to kill them off, right?
yeah, you do.
I just for anybody who knows, 2 years ago it was negative 40 today. 2 years ago,
I know.
so
Yeah.
No,
we're still going to get what's coming to us.
At some point.
It's just going to be in March
wait-
and April and May.
I'm waiting for it, and my kids are waiting for it because they haven't been to sledding at all this year.
And I have a new snow ice cream recipe that I'm really excited to try. So come on, Snow.
Does it have to do with pouring some Willie's Distillery product in
Yes, it just might.
it? So, all right.
I'm
Final.
saving a little bit left of huckleberry liqueur because I'm like, this would make really great snow ice cream.
Final question for Willie. What advice would you give someone trying to build something real, whether it's a business, a portfolio, or life?
Yeah, I think just be authentic, have integrity, and, be willing to fight for that, building something real. I mean, it's hard. It's tough. Everybody's got ideas and dreams, and it's hard to like actually step out and take that first step and actually do it. At some point you've got to action it. Like I said, I'm an idea guy. I can come up with thousands of ideas. The hardest part is execution, making that happen, and then deciding when you're going to pull the trigger and when to, it's like, all right, this is kind of a dumb idea, maybe I shouldn't do it. Just listening to your gut, I think.
Well, and I think good on you for, like, honestly listening to the people who are already your customers and stuff. And even if you're like, well, I don't know, but if enough people are saying that, I love the expression. It's important to love what is true, not try to make true that what you love.
Don't force
Because
it.
if it's not true, it doesn't matter how much you love it. And actually, it was funny. We were actually talking about this earlier because we when we started, we had a different name for the show. He had this whole treasure trove idea that we're the treasure state, and he loved it. But everybody kept calling it the Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom. And I was like, you know what? He's like, why do people keep doing that? It's the treasure trove. I was like, well, maybe you should embrace that because obviously that is supposed to actually be. And then when he married into that, I was like, okay, actually, I enjoy this, and it does sum up everything in a way that people understand. So
Yeah, it's like the WWF, Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom.
Yeah, there is
Hulk Hogan
that
style. Yeah.
hey, that works too.
That's why I put the and sign in between the W's and the F.
Yeah.
It's not just WWF, it's WW
And
F.
Yeah.
But hey, if we can play off of any of their stuff and get found that way, awesome.
Well, I don't know. And, probably better to be the World Wrestling Federation than the World Wildlife Federation.
That's true.
That,
That is another WWF.
yeah. But
Who has
anyway,
more market share?
yeah. Kyle, do you have any parting questions for Willie before we shut this thing
Or
down?
parting comments?
Yeah.
My comment would be, this is probably my favorite whiskey I've ever had. So appreciate that. Like, seriously, it's extremely good. I love the flavor in it. And while I said I like the Stockman, this one is definitely, this is the top for me.
Yeah.
Now,
Cool.
unfortunately,
Thanks.
yeah, and I will have to mention, because you do live in Montana, Montana is one of the few states that doesn't, you can't ship.
Well, no, but
like-
it's in any store. He would
No,
go to
no,
in
I know
Helena, right?
that's where I'm going with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it's a Montana law.
Oh yeah, it's
like
strictly Montana.
You can't put a shipment together from Ennis and ship it to Columbia Falls.
Right. Oh yeah, we go through the state of Montana.
Yeah,
the liquor division, and
They need to make sure that
control
their local
state.
liquor
Yeah.
store is carrying your products.
Right. It's
Right.
just, so from our standpoint, we live in Montana, that hopefully we're going to reach a lot of Montanans with this show. So they're like, well, wait a minute. I can't have product shipped to my house. No, you can't, but you can,
Walk
you
into
can
your
walk
local
to the
liquor
local
store.
liquor store and
Yeah.
more than likely buy it there.
yeah.
And if
there's-
they want to get the cool glasses online, they can ship those,
right.
Yeah.
and that will get the discount with Treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wish Montana's one of the 19 control states, and I like control states. Lots of times the big guys don't because they can't massage the state or the government, you know, to make their things happen. But I do wish Montana was more open, like some of the other states that would allow direct shipping, you know, whether it's us or it's Montana liquor stores or whatever that could send, you know, alcohol or bottles to other not other states, but other people. You know, like California does that. There's a lot of states that are allowed to do that, but we can't. You know, we're just kind of missing out on something that we make here that we can't sell to people who want it.
Which is interesting. I mean, we're a state that it takes 10 hours to drive across. So if I have a friend in eastern Montana who I want to send a bottle of Willie's,
well, they can go down to their local liquor store
and pick it up. I can send it there, like gift it, but they have to go pick it up there. Ultimately, if I wanted to gift it to them,
I don't think you can.
Yeah, you couldn't mail it.
No, I couldn't mail it. But I'd have to just call that local liquor store.
Yeah, and you could
buy it and be like, "Hey, they're gonna pick it up."
Credit card or whatever.
That's crazy. Like that is weird that I can't send them.
No, and it's controlled, and that's we knew that coming in, and that was part of the intriguing factor. Was we knew there was a lot of laws and a lot of red tape, and we knew that if we could get through a lot of that hard stuff, that was going to make a lot of other people quit or turn back. Hey, this isn't easy.
Right.
We knew we could probably make it if we could, you know, cross those hurdles. And that was some of my military background. Was everything just kept getting harder and harder. It's like, oh, you want to be these guys, these cool guys wearing Wranglers and carrying MP5s or whatever? Well, you got to go through these certain stages to get to that point.
Yep.
Why did they do that?
What's that? No.
Why did they
You mean
keep
in the military?
Yeah. Why did they keep
I think it's in a lot of you could look at it like at the NFL level or whatever. It's like, oh, you want to make the varsity football team, you got to go through this process. Oh, you want to get a college scholarship playing football, you got to do these things. Oh, you want to play in the NFL, you got to do these things. So I think it's very similar. It's just in that aspect.
Cutting the cream.
You got to earn it. You got to put in the work. You got to do stuff that other people are going to quit at, you know, if you want the rewards.
It seems like here in America, the top echelon is not reserved for people who can buy it, but for the people that will earn it.
Yeah.
And that's always been the beautiful thing about us.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
We have a friend we've had on the show a couple times who's from Russia and grew up under the, you know, started the Soviets and stuff. And gosh, she's fascinating from that standpoint of truly appreciating what we have and we were all born into.
Yeah. Well, Willie and Kyle, thanks for, I'll just say coming up from Ennis.
Yeah.
And down from Helena.
And down from Helena.
I don't know where we are in relation to the river.
I mean, I do know that, you know, as far as a map is concerned, I look above myself to you and that's below myself to just on the map.
I don't look down at you, just so we're all on
No.
the same
So
page.
you had to cross the Continental Divide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
No, you didn't.
I mean,
You know what?
Actually,
yeah,
no, you
McDonald
don't.
Pass, Rogers Pass.
It depends on if you
Yeah.
go through Butte. If you don't go through Butte,
if
then
you
you
go
don't
through
have
Butte,
to.
you do.
Yeah.
But if you came through Boulder, you didn't have to.
I came through Boulder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So are we upriver or downriver from you?
You're downriver, and
We're
he's
downriver.
downriver.
We're all downriver from
Yeah, because the way the source of the rivers, the way that they flow, that's like the craziest thing.
That is
Yeah,
crazy.
the Madison
Yeah.
River, and then
They come out of the
Hell
park.
Roaring Creek. You know, Red Rocks.
That's true. They all come this
The
way and then
Centennials,
turn.
and that's actually in Beaverhead County.
Oh,
And
that's
we're
crazy.
in Madison County, but that's the headwaters of the Missouri River, which ultimately ends up in the Gulf of America now, not the Gulf of Mexico.
But it goes,
I didn't know that.
but it goes towards Canada before it heads.
It goes all the way to Great Falls, and then it
Oh, that's funny.
heads
That
east,
is true.
hangs a right, and
Everyone that I know
Goes
that
to
has
Missouri.
an innate sense of direction, when they come to this area, they get confused.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for coming downriver.
yeah.
Well, and that's one of the big distinctions with the Continental Divide is all rivers east of the divide flow to the east. All
Yeah.
rivers west of the divide flow to the west, right?
And
But north, too.
and you have a mountain called Triple Divide Peak in Glacier National Park.
Oh,
and
right.
The reason it's called Triple Divide Peak was because on top of that mountain if you were to stand up there and maybe take a leak or whatever, like it could end up in the Arctic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic.
I feel like you're. I feel like I just,
You've had to do
I
it,
just feel
right?
like you're speaking
Tell
from
me you've done
experience. Yeah.
I haven't climbed it, but that's one of my goals. And it's not a super high mountain. I think it's like 8,000 feet, but it's, in Glacier National Park, but it's called Triple Divide Peak. So Montana's kind of cool that we have a place that, water flows into 3 different oceans. I don't think any other state can say that.
That is really cool.
Montana's a pretty freaking cool place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome place.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm shutting it down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I gotta run back to Montana. I had my fun.